The human fleet tore through the Draconis lines like a hot knife through butter, ending a centuries-long galactic war in mere hours. Hours earlier, the battle had been raging between the rebel Nox faction and the Draconis Empire. Rebel ships burned and died under the onslaught of Imperial weapons. Nox watched helplessly from the bridge of his crippled flagship Dread Talon as his fleet was decimated. Alan King, a grizzled human mercenary, had been hired to help turn the tide, but even his battle-hardened skills were useless against the might of the Draconis fleet. As explosions lit up the void around him, Alan heard Nox's desperate plea crackle over the comm. "Alan, you must go. Get to Earth. Rally your people. You're our only hope." Alan swore, slamming a fist on his instrument panel. He hated running from a fight, but Nox was right. The fate of the rebellion, the future of the galaxy itself, hung in the balance. If humanity didn't join the war, the Draconis would crush all resistance and rule forever. Alan activated his cloaking device and disengaged, racing for the edge of the battle. The journey to Earth would be long and perilous, with Draconis spies and informants everywhere. But Alan had to succeed. He was the only one who could convince the humans to bring their rumored secret fleet into the war. Without it, there would be no stopping the Draconis. They would subjugate every world in the galaxy, Earth included. Trillions of lives depended on Alan now. He just prayed he would reach Earth in time, before there was no rebellion left to save. Alan's starfighter streaked through the asteroid fields and nebulae of the outer rim. His hands gripped the controls tightly as he maneuvered around the floating rocks and clouds of gas. There was no room for error. One wrong move, and he'd be space dust. The fighter's sensors constantly scanned for any sign of Draconis patrols or sensor nets. He couldn't afford to be detected, not when the fate of the rebellion rested on his shoulders. Alan had been flying for days, pushing his ship and himself to the limit. His supplies were running low and his nerves were frayed. He needed to reach Earth soon, before it was too late. Suddenly, his comm crackled to life. "Mayday! Mayday! This is the human freighter Starlight. We are under attack by Draconis raiders, requesting immediate assistance." Alan hesitated. He knew that any delay could jeopardize his mission, but he also knew he couldn't abandon his fellow humans in their time of need. With a muttered curse, he changed course and raced towards the freighter's coordinates. As he approached, he saw the Starlight surrounded by a dozen Draconis fighters. The raiders' weapons pounded the freighter's failing shields. It wouldn't hold out much longer. Alan didn't hesitate. He engaged the raiders, his superior skills and advanced human weaponry evening the odds. The Draconis fighters broke off their attack on the freighter and turned to face this new threat. A vicious dogfight ensued. Alan juked and jinked, dodging laser fire and missiles. His own weapons spat death, picking off the Draconis ships one by one. But even as he thinned their numbers, more fighters arrived to take their place. Just as Alan blasted the last of the raiders into oblivion, a massive shape dropped out of hyperspace. It was a Draconis warship, alerted by the distress calls of its fighters. And not just any warship. It was the Dread Talon, Nox's flagship. The same ship Alan had barely escaped from in the battle that had decimated the rebel fleet. Alan knew he couldn't hope to defeat such a powerful vessel alone. "Starlight, get out of here," he yelled into the comm. "I'll buy you some time." As the freighter fled, Alan turned to face the warship. He dodged its turbolaser fire and plasma torpedoes, his shields buckling under the onslaught. He managed to slip behind the behemoth and launched a proton bomb at its engines. The explosion crippled the warship, but Alan's own ship didn't escape unscathed. Alarms blared in the cockpit, as critical systems failed. Alan barely managed to make the jump to hyperspace before his engines gave out completely. He emerged on the edge of a human-controlled system, his ship barely holding together. He crash-landed at the nearest outpost, his mission to reach Earth still far from over. Pain lanced through Alan's body as he slowly regained consciousness in the outpost's medical bay. Every breath sent sharp spikes of agony through his chest, and his head throbbed mercilessly. But physical pain was nothing compared to the weight of his mission bearing down on him. As his vision cleared, he saw the worried faces of the outpost's medics and security personnel gathered around his bed. Their expressions told him all he needed to know. Something was very wrong. The security chief stepped forward, his face grim. "We're under siege, sir. Draconis ground forces have surrounded the outpost. They're being led by Admiral Knox himself." The medic frowned as Alan struggled to sit up. "Sir, your injuries are severe. You need to rest." Alan brushed her off, gritting his teeth against the pain. "I'll rest when I'm dead. Right now we've got a battle to win." He limped to the command center, leaning heavily on the security chief for support. The room was in chaos, with alarms blaring and personnel shouting frantic reports. The outpost's defenses were crumbling under the relentless Draconis assault, their energy weapons and plasma grenades taking a terrible toll. Alan assessed the tactical displays, his mind racing. The Draconis had them surrounded and outnumbered. A frontal assault would be suicide, but perhaps there was another way. "These tunnels and service corridors," Alan jabbed a finger at the map. "Where do they lead?" The security chief blinked. "They run underneath the entire outpost, connecting all the key facilities, but they're a maze, easy to get lost." A predatory grin spread across Alan's face. "Or easy to set up an ambush. Here's the plan." Minutes later, Alan was leading a squad of the outpost's best fighters through the dimly lit tunnels. They moved silently, the only sound the soft click of weapons being checked and primed. They emerged behind the Draconis lines, catching the invaders completely by surprise. Alan's squad laid down a withering hail of blaster fire, scattering the Draconis troops and sowing chaos in their ranks. But Alan had a bigger target in mind. He fought his way towards the Draconis command post, his eyes locked on the shadowy figure at its center, Knox. The two rivals clashed in a furious melee, energy blades flashing and sparking. Around them the battle raged, human and Draconis forces locked in brutal close-quarters combat. Alan pressed his attack, driving Knox back with a flurry of blows. Victory was within his grasp until a plasma grenade detonated nearby, the blast wave throwing him to the ground. By the time the smoke cleared, Knox was gone, escaped in the confusion. But the Draconis offensive had been shattered, the survivors fleeing into the wilderness. Alan staggered back to his feet, bloodied but unbowed. There would be another day to settle the score with Knox. For now, he had a mission to complete. As the outpost's defenders regrouped and tended to their wounded, Alan slipped away to the hangar bay. His starfighter was battered but spaceworthy, the repairs made with salvaged Draconis tech. He prepared for takeoff, his thoughts already racing ahead to Earth and the battles to come. But as he rocketed into the sky, he couldn't shake the feeling that his actions had set something much larger in motion. The flames of war between humanity and the Draconis had been stoked to a raging inferno, and there would be no turning back. Alan's grip tightened on the controls as his starfighter burst out of hyperspace. The inky void of space was suddenly filled with the menacing shapes of Draconis warships, their hulls bristling with enough firepower to reduce a planet to molten slag. "Shit!" Alan growled, his eyes darting across the tactical display. The Draconis had anticipated his arrival and set up a blockade around Earth. They were determined to stop him from reaching the planet at any cost. Laser fire and plasma torpedoes streaked past his cockpit as the Draconis opened fire. Alan jinked and rolled, pushing his battered ship to its limits. Sparks flew from overloaded systems, and the shields flickered dangerously, barely holding back the onslaught. He knew he couldn't break through alone. With a muttered prayer, he punched in a coded distress signal, hoping against hope that anyone would answer the call. For a heart-stopping moment, there was nothing but the roar of enemy fire and the groan of his ship's straining hull. Then, like angels descending from on high, a squadron of sleek black starfighters materialized out of the void. They were unlike anything Alan had ever seen, all smooth lines and deadly grace, with weapons that glowed an eerie blue. Without a word, they fell into formation behind him, engaging the Draconis with ruthless precision. The enemy ships, caught completely off guard, scattered like leaves before a hurricane. Explosions bloomed in the void as the mysterious fighters carved a path through their ranks. Seizing the chance, Alan gunned his engines and punched through the gap in the blockade. The fighters closed ranks behind him, covering his escape with a withering barrage of fire. As he plunged into Earth's atmosphere, his comm crackled to life. "Alan King, this is Admiral Hawkins of Earth's Defense Fleet. Welcome home, soldier." The voice was gruff and no-nonsense, the kind that expected obedience without question. "Earth has been preparing for this war for years. Those fighters that just saved your bacon? They're just a taste of what we've got in store for the Draconis." Alan's eyes widened as he took in the Admiral's words. Earth had a secret fleet, advanced tech and troops ready to fight. "Report to our base on the far side of the moon for debriefing and reassignment ASAP," Hawkins ordered. "And King, good work out there. You just might have given us the edge we need to win this thing." As Alan brought his starfighter in for a landing at the hidden lunar base, he couldn't help but stare in awe. Stretching out before him were rows upon rows of warships, fighters, and ground assault vehicles, a war machine on a scale he had never dared to imagine. Uniformed troops and technicians swarmed over the gleaming hulls, preparing for the battles to come. For the first time since the war began, Alan felt a flicker of hope. With Earth's might finally brought to bear, they might just have a chance to turn the tide against the Draconis once and for all. He leapt from his cockpit, wincing as his battered body protested the sudden movement. There would be time to rest and heal later. Right now he had a job to do. As he strode towards the briefing room, Alan's mind raced with the implications of what he had just learned. Earth had been hiding its strength, biding its time until the moment was right. And now, with the Draconis threat looming larger than ever, that moment had arrived. In the command center's dim light, Alan and Hawkins scrutinized the intelligence reports scrolling across the screens. The data painted a grim picture. Nox, now Supreme Commander of the Draconis forces, had unleashed a devastating offensive against the rebel strongholds. Planets burned, fleets shattered, and hope dwindled with each passing hour. "He's hitting them with everything he's got," Hawkins growled, his fists clenched. "The rebels won't last much longer at this rate." "We need to hit him where it hurts," Alan said, his voice low and determined. "The Draconis homeworld. If we can strike at the heart of their empire, we can force them to divert their forces from the outer rim." "Leave that to me," Alan said, a hard edge to his voice. "I'll infiltrate the capital city, sabotage their planetary shields from within. Your fleet can handle the rest." As they worked out the details of the plan, the base buzzed with activity. Ships were fueled, weapons primed, and troops briefed. The Earth fleet was preparing for war, and the anticipation was electric. But as Alan made his final preparations, a message blinked onto his personal comm. It was encrypted, the source anonymous. He opened it warily, his eyes widening as he read the contents. Detailed schematics of the Draconis homeworld's defenses scrolled across the screen. Each weakness and vulnerability laid bare. But it was the final line that made Alan's blood run cold. Alan's mind raced. If Nox was aware of their plan, the attack on the homeworld could be a trap. The Earth fleet could be flying into an ambush, their secret weapon revealed and destroyed in one fell swoop. But if they didn't act, the rebels would fall. Billions would suffer under Draconis rule, and Nox would be unstoppable. Alan closed his eyes, the weight of the decision heavy on his shoulders. The risks were immense, the stakes higher than they'd ever been. But he knew what he had to do. He strode into the command center, his face set with fierce resolve. Hawkins looked up, a question in his eyes. "We go ahead with the attack," Alan said, his voice ringing with conviction. "But with a twist, Nox thinks he knows our plan, so we're going to show him just how wrong he is." A slow grin spread across Hawkins' face as Alan outlined his audacious new strategy. It was bold, it was risky, and it just might work. As the Earth fleet launched, Alan settled into the cockpit of his starfighter. The Draconis homeworld awaited, and with it, the chance to end this war once and for all. Nox would be there, he knew, ready for their long-awaited reckoning. Alan's grip tightened on the controls, his eyes locked on the stars ahead. Come what may, he would see this through to the end. For Earth, for the rebels, and for every soul who had ever suffered under Draconis tyranny. The Draconis capital sprawled beneath Alan as he descended towards the planetary defense control hub, his stolen technician's uniform itching against his skin. The towering spires of the city glittered in the harsh light of the system's binary stars, their beauty belying the cruelty of the regime that built them. Alan's heart pounded as he approached the heavily guarded entrance to the hub. The schematics his mysterious benefactor had provided were detailed, but no plan survived contact with the enemy. He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. The guards at the door scrutinized his falsified ID, their reptilian eyes cold and suspicious. For a tense moment, Alan thought his cover had been blown, but then the scanner beeped, the light flashing green, and the guards waved him through with a grunt. Inside the hub was a maze of corridors and control rooms, each humming with the activity of Draconis technicians and officers. Alan moved quickly, his eyes darting from the schematics displayed on his wrist computer to the labyrinthine layout of the facility. Suddenly the door hissed open behind him. Alan spun, his hand flying to the human blaster concealed beneath his uniform, but he was too slow. A burst of plasma fire struck him in the shoulder, spinning him around and slamming him into the control panel. Through the haze of pain, Alan saw a squad of Draconis guards pouring into the room, their weapons trained on him. He reacted on instinct, his training taking over. He dove to the side, ignoring the searing agony in his shoulder as he rolled behind a bank of consoles. The guards opened fire, plasma bolts sizzling through the air and exploding against the equipment. Alan returned fire, his blaster spitting blue bolts of superheated plasma. The first guard went down, a smoking hole in his chest. The second took a bolt to the head, his skull vaporizing in a spray of bone and gore. But there were too many of them. Alan was forced to retreat, darting from cover to cover as the guards pressed their attack. He lobbed a plasma grenade, the explosion taking out 3 more guards and buying him a precious few seconds. He used them to finish arming the last of his explosives. Just as he was about to make his escape, a figure emerged from the smoke and ruin of the control room. A figure Alan knew all too well. Nox strode forward, his eyes glinting with malice and triumph. Gone was the refined admiral's uniform. In its place was a suit of powered combat armor, bristling with weapons and humming with malevolent energy. "Alan King," Nox hissed, his voice distorted by the armor's speakers. "I knew you'd come. You're so predictable." Alan raised his blaster, but Nox was faster. A blast of energy from the armor's gauntlet sent the weapon flying from Alan's grip. Nox closed the distance between them in a heartbeat, his armored fist slamming into Alan's gut with crushing force. Alan doubled over, gasping for breath. But he wasn't done yet. He lashed out with a kick, his boot connecting with Nox's armored knee. The Draconis warlord stumbled, his armor sparking. Alan pressed his advantage, raining blows on Nox's helmeted head and seeking out the weak points in his armor. But Nox was too strong, too fast. His cybernetically enhanced body absorbed the punishment, and he returned it tenfold. They traded blows across the ruined control room, Alan's skill and determination pitted against Nox's raw power and advanced technology. Consoles shattered and equipment exploded under the force of their battle, the room filling with smoke and the stench of burning circuitry. Above them, visible through the room's panoramic windows, the sky came alive with the light of battle. The Earth fleet had arrived, and they were engaging the Draconis defense ships with a fury that lit up the heavens. Draconis ships burst like fireworks, while the sleek human vessels danced through the fire, their advanced weapons carving through the enemy fleet. Alan saw his chance. With a final, desperate effort, he lunged for the detonator on his wrist computer. His fingers closed around it just as Nox's armored hand closed around his throat. The world exploded. The charges Alan had planted throughout the control hub detonated in a cascading series of blasts, ripping through the facility's power systems and control circuits. In an instant, The planetary defense grid went dark, the Draconis homeworld stripped of its electronic shield. Nox roared in fury, his grip tightening around Alan's neck. Through the choking pressure, Alan felt a grim satisfaction. He had done his job. Earth's victory was now assured. But Nox wasn't finished. With a strength born of rage and desperation, he hauled Alan off his feet and slammed him against the fractured window. The transparisteel groaned and splintered under the impact, the dizzying drop of the city's heights suddenly visible beneath them. They plummeted, locked in a deadly embrace as the wind howled past them, and the unforgiving ground rushed up to meet them. Nox's armored fists pounded at Alan, seeking to break his grip, but Alan held on with the stubborn tenacity that had defined his entire life. With his free hand, he scrabbled at his belt, seeking the one piece of human technology that could save him. His fingers closed around the emergency teleport beacon, a device no bigger than a coin. He thumbed the activation switch just as the ground filled his vision, so close he could see the cracks in the pavement. There was a flash of blinding light, a wrenching sensation like his body was being torn apart, atom by atom. And then he was gone, leaving Nox to plummet alone to his fate. The last thing Alan saw before the teleport whisked him away was the look of stunned disbelief on the Draconis warlord's face, visible through his shattered helmet. Then the world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of light and color, and Alan knew no more. Alan materialized on the bridge of the ESS Titan in a flash of blinding light, his battered body still crackling with residual teleport energy. The bridge crew recoiled in shock, hands flying to weapons. But Admiral Hawkins stepped forward, his eyes wide with disbelief and relief. "No time," Alan cut him off, limping to the tactical display. "The planetary defenses are down. Hit them now with everything we've got." Hawkins hesitated for only a heartbeat before springing into action. "All ships commence attack. Target their command centers, weapons factories, anything that can hurt us. Don't let up." The Earth fleet surged forward, a tide of gleaming metal and bristling weapons. Lances of energy rained down on the Draconis capital, smashing through buildings and igniting firestorms that raged out of control. The Draconis forces scrambled to respond, their formations in disarray without the guiding hand of their defense network. But even as they struggled to regroup, a new threat emerged. A fleet of rebel ships cobbled together from a dozen different races and factions dropped out of hyperspace behind the Draconis lines. At their head was a massive warship, nearly the size of the Titan herself, and on her bridge, standing tall and proud, was Zarin, Nox's own brother. "This is Zarin to Earthfleet," his voice boomed over the comm. "The true children of Draconis stand with you. Let us end this tyranny together." The rebel ships tore into the Draconis rear, catching them in a devastating crossfire. Draconis ships burst like overripe fruit, spilling debris and bodies into the void. The tide had turned. But on the surface, the fight was far from over. Nox rallied his most loyal troops, the fanatics who would follow him into the very jaws of hell. They barricaded themselves in the Imperial Palace, every window a gun slit, every door a kill zone. Alan watched the fortress on the view screen, his jaw set. "He's in there, Nox. This is our chance to end this once and for all." Hawkins nodded grimly. "Then let's take it. Prep a drop pod. I'm sending in Omega Squad, our very best. Bring me that scaly bastard's head." Minutes later, Alan was crammed into a drop pod with a dozen hardened human commandos, hurtling towards the surface. The pod shook and bucked as anti-aircraft fire filled the skies, but the pod's AI held course, aiming for a courtyard deep within the palace complex. They hit the ground hard, the pod's armor absorbing the worst of the impact. The doors blew open and Alan was moving, his rifle spitting plasma as Draconis troops swarmed to meet them. The commandos fanned out, covering each other with interlocking fields of fire as they pushed deeper into the palace. Every room was a battle, every corridor a potential ambush. The Draconis fought with the desperate ferocity of cornered animals, but the humans were implacable, unstoppable. They advanced through sheer force of will, leaving a trail of shattered scales and broken bodies in their wake. At last they reached the throne room, the heart of the Draconis power. And there, waiting for them, was Nox. He stood alone, his armor dented and scorched, his eyes blazing with unquenchable hate. "King," he roared, his voice raw and ragged, "I'll tear the flesh from your bones." Alan stepped forward, motioning for his squad to hold back. This was his fight, his destiny. He met Nox's charge with a roar of his own, and they clashed in the center of the room, human fury against Draconis rage. They traded blows with savage abandon, fists and feet and elbows turning flesh to pulp and bone to powder. Alan felt ribs crack and tasted blood, but he pushed through the pain, his every sense focused on the monster before him. Nox was a whirlwind of violence, his cybernetically enhanced body moving with blinding speed and crushing force. But Alan was driven by something more than metal and circuits. He fought for every human who had suffered under Draconis rule, for every world that cried out for freedom. And in that moment, as they grappled in the ruins of Nox's empire, Alan knew that he couldn't lose. He would end this, here and now, no matter the cost. The future of the galaxy itself hung in the balance, and he would not let it fall. With a final titanic effort, Alan locked his arms around Nox's throat and began to squeeze. Alan and Nox circled each other in the throne room, blades flashing in the dim light. Nox's energy sword crackled and hummed, the air shimmering around its plasma-wreathed edge. Alan's monomolecular knives gleamed, their razor-sharp blades promising swift and surgical death. Nox struck first, his sword cleaving the air in a sizzling arc. Alan ducked beneath the blow, then lunged, his knives seeking the gaps in Nox's armor. The Draconis warlord parried, his blade moving with inhuman speed. They traded blows in a deadly dance, their weapons clashing and sparking. Nox pressed his advantage, his energy sword a blur of light as he rained down overhead chops and sweeping slashes. Alan gave ground, his knives a whirling shield, as he deflected and redirected Nox's strikes. The palace shook, dust raining from the ceiling as the orbital bombardment intensified. Nox's eyes widened as he felt his empire crumbling around him. With a snarl of rage, he activated his cybernetic enhancements. His muscles swelled, his veins pulsing with glowing ichor, as combat stimulants flooded his system. He moved with blinding speed, his sword a crackling whirlwind, as he battered through Alan's defenses. Alan staggered back, his knives barely deflecting the onslaught. Nox loomed over him, his sword raised for a killing blow, but Alan refused to yield. He dug deep, drawing on every scrap of skill and experience he'd gained in a lifetime of war. As Nox's sword descended, Alan moved. He feinted left, then lunged right, his knife finding a weak point in Nox's armor. The blade sank deep, piercing cybernetics and flesh. Nox reeled back, his sword falling from his grasp as his enhancements shorted out. Sparks flew from his armor, and his body convulsed with spasms. Alan pressed his advantage, his knives flashing as he disarmed Nox and forced him to his knees. Around them, the last of Nox's troops lowered their weapons, their will to fight extinguished as they saw their leader fall. Alan stood over Nox, his chest heaving with exertion, but his voice steady. "Surrender," he said, "and face justice for your crimes, or die here and be remembered as a tyrant and a fool." Nox looked up at Alan, his eyes burning with hatred. But there was something else there too, a grudging respect for the human who had bested him. For a long moment he hesitated, pride warring with reason. Then, with a growl of resignation, he deactivated his energy sword and tossed it at Alan's feet. He had chosen life and perhaps a chance at redemption. As Nox's energy sword clattered to the floor, the sounds of battle outside the palace walls began to fade. Alan's comm crackled to life, urgent voices overlapping as they relayed the news. The Draconis forces were standing down across the planet, their will to fight extinguished with their leader's defeat. Alan hauled Nox to his feet, the Draconis warlord's scales scraping against his battered armor. Around them, human and rebel Draconis soldiers secured the throne room, their weapons trained on the surrendering Imperial guards. "Understood, King," Hawkins replied, his tone thick with relief and pride. "Damn fine work. The fleet is mopping up the last pockets of resistance in orbit. We'll have boots on the ground within the hour to help secure key locations planetside." Alan nodded, his grip tightening on Nox's arm. "And the rebel ships?" "They're with us," Hawkins confirmed. "Zarin's forces are already coordinating with our ground teams. Looks like this little coup of his paid off big time." A ghost of a smile tugged at Alan's lips. Zarin, the brother Nox had always underestimated, had proven to be a cunning ally in the end. The next days passed in a blur of activity, as the occupation of the Draconis homeworld proceeded at a breakneck pace. Human and rebel soldiers worked side by side to disarm the remnants of the Imperial military, seizing weapons caches and dismantling fortifications. Engineers and technicians swarmed over captured Draconis facilities, working to decipher and secure the advanced alien technology within. At the center of it all was Alan, thrust into the unexpected role of diplomat and statesman. He worked tirelessly with Zarin and the other rebel leaders to establish a new provisional government, one that would represent the interests of both the Draconis people and their human allies. "The old ways are dead," Zarin declared at their first joint press conference, his voice ringing with conviction. "The Draconis Empire as it was cannot be allowed to return. We must build a new future, one based on cooperation and mutual understanding between our peoples." Alan, standing beside Zarin on the podium, could only nod in agreement. The war had taken a tremendous toll on both sides, but it had also forged bonds that could not be easily broken. In the weeks that followed, those bonds were put to the test as the hard work of rebuilding began. Trade agreements were hammered out, allowing for the flow of resources and technology between human and Draconis worlds. Cultural exchange programs were established, with scholars and artists from both civilizations eager to learn from one another. Joint military exercises were conducted, fostering a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose among the soldiers who had once been bitter enemies. But even as the galaxy began to heal, the specter of the past loomed large. Nox, the once mighty Supreme Commander, stood trial for his crimes before a tribunal of human and Draconis judges. The proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy, a riveting spectacle that held billions of viewers in rapt attention. The prosecution laid out a damning case, detailing Nox's ruthless campaigns against the rebel forces and the atrocities committed under his command. But it was Nox's own testimony that truly shocked the galaxy. Rather than defiant or unrepentant, the fallen warlord was somber and introspective, his voice heavy with regret as he recounted his actions. "I was blinded by my own ambition," he confessed, his gaze fixed on the judges. "I believed that the Draconis Empire could only survive through strength and domination. I was wrong. The path I chose led only to suffering and destruction for my own people as much as for our enemies." He turned to face Alan, who sat watching from the gallery, his expression unreadable. "I make no excuses for what I have done," Nox continued. "I offer no plea for mercy. I seek only to atone for my crimes in whatever way this court sees fit." A murmur rippled through the courtroom at Nox's words. Alan leaned forward in his seat, his mind racing. He had expected defiance, perhaps even a last desperate attempt at justification, but this was something else entirely. In that moment, Alan saw not the cruel tyrant he had fought for so long, but a broken man seeking redemption. And in that moment, he knew what he had to do. When it came time for the sentencing, Alan rose to address the court. Nox watched him warily, perhaps expecting a final condemnation from his greatest adversary. But the words that left Alan's lips were not of judgment, but of mercy. He spoke of the need for healing, for reconciliation. He argued that true justice lay not in punishment, but in the chance for even the most hardened of hearts to change. "Nox has committed great wrongs," Alan acknowledged, his voice ringing through the hushed courtroom. "But he has also shown the capacity for reflection, for growth. If we are to build a lasting peace, we must be willing to extend the hand of forgiveness, even to those who have wronged us most grievously." The judges, moved by Alan's impassioned plea and Nox's genuine contrition, delivered their verdict. Nox would not face execution or lifelong imprisonment, but would instead serve a term of service in the newly formed Human Draconis Peacekeeping Force. There, working alongside the very rebels he had once sought to destroy, he would have the chance to make amends, to use his skills and knowledge for the benefit of the galaxy he had once tried to conquer. As Nox was led away from the courtroom to begin his new life, his eyes met Alan's one last time. No words were spoken, but in that brief exchange, a wealth of understanding passed between them. They had been enemies, had fought each other with a fury that had shaken the stars. But now, through the crucible of war and the hard-won wisdom of peace, they had found a strange sort of kinship. A year had passed since the guns fell silent and the fires of war were extinguished. The fragile peace between humanity and the Draconis Empire, forged in the crucible of conflict, had begun to take root. But as Alan King knew all too well, peace was a delicate thing, easily shattered by those who clung to the old hatreds. Alan, now a high-ranking officer in the Human Draconis Peacekeeping Force, stood on the surface of a remote moon, overseeing a joint training exercise. Human and Draconis soldiers worked side by side, honing their skills and learning to trust one another. Among them was Nox, the former Draconis warlord who had once been Alan's bitterest enemy. But as the soldiers trained, a distress call crackled over the comms. A nearby colony, a symbol of the new era of cooperation, was under attack. Alan's blood ran cold as he listened to the desperate pleas for help, the sounds of weapons fire and screams echoing in the background. There was no time to waste. Alan and his team, Nox included, boarded their dropship and rocketed towards the besieged colony. As they approached, the extent of the devastation became clear. Buildings lay in ruins, smoke and flames billowing from the wreckage. The streets were littered with the bodies of colonists, both human and Draconis. Alan's grip tightened on his weapon as he surveyed the carnage. This was no random attack. This was the work of Draconis extremists, fanatics who refused to accept the new galactic order. The dropship touched down and Alan's team fanned out, moving cautiously through the shattered streets. The air was thick with the stench of death and the acrid tang of smoke. Alan's eyes darted from one ruined building to the next, searching for any sign of the surviving colonists. Suddenly, a burst of plasma fire erupted from a nearby structure. Alan and his team dove for cover, returning fire as Draconis extremists poured out of the building. The fanatics were well armed and well trained, their weapons spitting deadly bolts of energy. Alan and Nox fought side by side, their old animosity forgotten in the heat of battle. They moved as one, covering each other as they advanced, cutting down the extremists with precise bursts of fire. But for every fanatic they felled, another seemed to take their place. A cry for help cut through the chaos. The extremists had taken the surviving colonists hostage, herding them into a fortified compound at the heart of the colony. The leader of the fanatics, a towering Draconis warlord named Kravax, issued his ultimatum over the comms: meet his demands or the hostages would die. Alan's jaw tightened. He knew Kravax by reputation, a brutal and uncompromising warrior who had sworn to destroy the fragile peace between humans and Draconis. He would not hesitate to carry out his threat. Alan turned to Nox, a silent understanding passing between them. They would have to put aside their past differences and work together if they were to have any chance of saving the hostages. Nox nodded, his cybernetic eye glinting in the harsh light of the colony's twin suns. Together they infiltrated the extremists' compound, moving silently through the shadows. They dispatched the guards with quick, efficient strikes, their movements perfectly synchronized. As they delved deeper into the compound, they encountered wave after wave of fanatical soldiers, each more determined than the last to stop them. But Alan and Nox were unstoppable, a human and a Draconis united in purpose. They fought with a skill and ferocity that left the extremists reeling, their bodies littering the corridors and chambers of the compound. "You think you can stop me?" Kravax sneered, his voice distorted by his helmet speakers. "I will crush you and all who stand in the way of Draconis supremacy." He lunged forward, His armor enhanced strength and speed, making him a blur of motion. Alan and Nox met his charge head-on, their weapons flashing as they fought to bring down the raging warlord. But Kravax was a formidable opponent, his armor absorbing the worst of their attacks. He lashed out with crushing blows and searing energy blasts, forcing Alan and Nox back step by step. In the heat of the battle, Kravax's fist found its mark, smashing into Nox's chest with a sickening crunch. The Draconis warrior flew backwards, his cybernetic enhancements sparking and sputtering as he crashed to the ground. Alan's heart seized in his chest as he saw Nox fall. For a moment, he was torn between the desire to pursue Kravax and the need to help his fallen comrade. But as he looked into Nox's pain-filled eyes, he knew there was only one choice. With a roar of fury, Alan launched himself at Kravax's elite guards, his blades flashing as he cut them down. He fought with a savage intensity, driven by the need to protect Nox and the knowledge that if he failed, the hostages would surely die. Kravax, seeing his guards fall, made a break for the exit. Alan started to give chase, but a weak groan from Nox stopped him in his tracks. He couldn't leave his comrade, not after all they had been through together. Alan dragged Nox to safety, his muscles straining with the effort. As reinforcements flooded into the compound and the hostages were liberated, Alan cradled Nox's broken body in his arms. The Draconis warrior looked up at him, his breaths coming in shallow gasps. "I was wrong about your kind," he whispered, his voice thick with pain and regret. "You are not the enemy. You never were." With those final words, Nox's eyes fluttered shut and his body went limp. Alan felt a wave of grief wash over him, mingled with a grim determination. Nox's death would not be in vain. He would honor his sacrifice by continuing the fight for peace, no matter the cost. As Alan stood, his heart heavy with loss, he knew that the battle was far from over. Kravax had escaped, and he would not rest until he had torn down everything that Alan and Nox had fought so hard to build. But Alan was ready. He would meet this new threat head-on, just as he had met every challenge before. For the sake of the fallen, for the sake of the future, he would fight on. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.